Yeah, I hope that you hearing me. This is the future, all about cybersecurity. Talking about the hackers, I'm just trying to warn you. From the one and only legend, the cyber informer. Hey, thanks for joining the podcast. Time to get it hype. This I know you gonna like, giving you some insight. They try to hack in your database, homie, not today. Thinking they can escape with your data and without a trace. Oh yeah, this is the cyber informer. Hackers, you going down like, oh yeah. This is the cyber informer. Hackers, you going down, yeah.
It's time for Cybersecurity Business Connect and Protect Central Coast podcast. This is episode 8, Cyber Insurance. This episode is brought to you by Loyal IT Solutions. For all of your IT business needs, visit loyalit.com.au for more information on how we can help your business. And by the Gosford Erina Business Chamber. To have your business voice heard, become a member now. Visit us at gebc.com.au. And by the Australian Federal Government. Welcome to Cybersecurity Business Connect and Protect Central Coast podcast. I am Michael Trimblett, the Cyber Informer at cyber_informer on Twitter. In this special podcast, we talk about cyber insurance. If you run a business and you have an internet connection, you will likely need cyber insurance. Today we have Richard Cotter, Managing Director and owner of SoftGen. SoftGen and Loyal IT Solutions have been security partners for many years. Richard, thank you for giving up your time today to sit with me to discuss your research into cyber insurance.
Michael, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss what we've found over the years in working with a number of insurance companies, insurance brokers, and end users, policyholders. SoftGen's a valuated distributor. Our core competencies lie in the area of cybersecurity consultancy. As you know, we've had the privilege of working on a number of projects jointly with Loyal IT over the years. In addition to our cybersecurity consultancy, we also have a range of products that we make available that cover all the different aspects of security. Everything we do in terms of our services and our products, we like to make sure that they're scalable solutions. So they fit all sized organisations from SMEs to mid-range to enterprise-sized organisations, including both the public and private sectors. We've been in business since 1991, and during that period, we've always introduced what we believe are quality technology solutions to our partners, and therefore via our partners, their customers. We have an extensive network of partners throughout Australia. We cover the entire Australian continent, and we have a relationship with a number of leading global vendors that has been built up over the years. One of the things that I think is worthwhile highlighting is we believe that an effective security program has to be both proactive and reactive, and it has to be holistic in its approach. And through our consultancy services, that's what led us to having a number of discussions going back as early as 2018 with insurance companies and insurance brokers, and indeed organisations looking at acquiring cyber security insurance, because we saw a need in the market, specifically that market, for everybody from the customers to minimise their risks and for the insurance companies to be able to quantify what the risks were, because as we all know, IT infrastructure, no two sites are the same, so everybody has different challenges in that area. And that's what's brought us to being able to work with both insurance companies, brokers, and end users. One, the benefit for the end user, they get to understand their risk profile or their risk posture. From the insurance company's point of view, they understand what specific risks or the level of risk may face a particular policyholder.
Well, that's a really good point, because you mentioned that many businesses, and there's no business that's exactly the same. So it really makes it difficult, I guess, from the security posture point of view, or from being able to insure them. That would be a tough job on insurance companies, I think, or insurance brokers, to be able to break through all of these many different. You can have almost an infinite number of combinations of equipment and configurations and patch levels and antivirus products and different levels of user awareness. How can it be insurable? Because it seems like there's so many controls that they would like to have in place that insurance companies wouldn't be able to have in place, I guess, in every single business. What can you tell me about cyber insurance? Who needs it? Why would you need it?
Well, again, Michael, great question, because From our point of view, we see that everybody needs to consider cyber insurance. But cyber insurance is not a silver bullet. It doesn't prevent you from being the victim of a successful cyber attack. What it does do, of course, is help you offset any costs involved if, unfortunately, you are a victim of a cyber attack. It's currently in high demand. There's a lot of people out there. It's very contentious at the moment because a lot of it from both the insurer's point of view and the policyholder's point of view is built around ransomware, which is obviously the big cost involved if you're a victim of cybercrime. Companies feel that they have no other option other than to pay the ransomware so that they can get the encryption keys so they can access their data. The problem is when you pay the ransomware, whether you have to pay it direct or whether an insurance company is covering you for ransomware payments, is that statistics are showing that if you pay ransomware, you are then 80% likely to be attacked a second or third time. Because what happens is you've paid, the bad guys know you're going to pay, so you become an easy target. Why?
Wow,
because
that's scary. Wow, that is scary. I didn't realize that was a statistic on that. Wow.
Well, it all sort of adds up, Michael, that's a problem. For years now, law enforcement authorities around the world have been calling for ransomware payments to be made illegal because, the attitude is, and any police officer will tell you, if you reward bad behavior, you're encouraging bad behavior. And that's the whole issue at the moment. So there are a number of organizations around the world that say, well, what we should do is rather than have insurance companies paying out ransomware or extortion payments, then maybe what we should have is a mandate on a minimum security set of guidelines. And some people say it could be in a model akin to airline safety regulations that companies follow. So it's more guidelines rather than being, a set of rules or regulations. But if you didn't follow those guidelines and you were in specific industries, you would be fined. And you will find, as I'm sure you know, a lot of these discussions are currently taking place in Canberra around cybersecurity, what laws can be put in place, what laws can be enforced to ensure that people are more focused on security. Because what happens is, if you know that your insurance company is going to pay out a ransomware demand, which is a majority of any costs involved in recovering from a cyber attack, with those costs, and somebody's going to pay them, then what happens is you don't spend enough time, or you become a little bit more slack, or you don't focus enough on putting security policies in place that will help minimize a potential attack.
I remember there was talk a few years back, I don't know how far that got, but I think the Australian government was looking to outlaw ransomware payments because they could potentially be going to fund terrorism. Obviously, that can't be the case if insurance companies are going to be paying it out on behalf of their clients. So, so they're looking at implementing a law to fine people for paying ransoms, but how would they know that the ransoms are being paid? That's kind of without them voluntarily telling them that this is, I paid this ransom, come find me.
I guess that's the other part of the legislation is, and we've already got that in place with the breach notification rules and that, where as organisations that have a turnover of greater than $3 million Australian are supposed to report to the government if they have any cyber breach that involves the loss of confidential or personal information. So some of those laws are already in place. I think the other thing that will change ransomware payments is the fact that insurance companies are not making any money out of this. The profitability is very, very low because of paying out extortion or ransomware payments. And in fact, one of the leading insurance companies globally have already flagged the fact that they will not include ransomware payouts in future cybersecurity policies. So that sort of momentum from different areas is going to impact that people won't have this safety net, or the safety net will change quite substantially in terms of how ransomware payments are handled in future.
And we might come to this a little bit later on, but if you're not being covered for ransomware, what are you getting covered for? That seems to be the main draw card for getting cyber insurance these days, is that, well, if I get ransomed up, well, I don't have to worry about paying it no matter what the cost is.
And I think you're quite right. I think if people look at cyber insurance is no different from any other insurance. You've basically got a menu that you can choose from in the areas that you want to cover in your insurance policy. So you're quite right, Michael. Ransomware is a major component of it in terms of the payouts, etc. One of the points that could be of interest to people is that the largest single payout of ransomware recorded in history is $40 million US.
Whoa, ouch.
So that gives you some idea of when you talk about the scale of ransomware, and the amount of money being paid out is undoubtedly increasing and rapidly increasing. That's why the insurance companies are saying, well, wait a sec, maybe this is not the growth sector that we were looking for.
No, clearly not. I mean, although that would also bankrupt small business 40, 80, 100 times over, with that sort of payment. Wow. That's amazingly huge ransom payout.
Yeah. And as you said previously, you made a point about governments being concerned where all this ransomware money ends up, because it end up in the hands of terrorists and organizations such as that. And the US has already flagged that they consider the payment of ransomware as being a national security threat.
Yeah,
so
right.
That's already on the table. So it gives you an idea of the scale of it.
Yeah. So I think we'll see widespread legislation. Multiple countries will implement something like this just to stop that money going, well, probably offshore to typically, the big three, which I think is usually it's either China, North Korea, or Russia are usually the ones that we keep hearing in the news that keep getting ransomware payments. So,
that's very true.
What are the main cyber threats cyber insurance will protect a business from? So we've already talked about the payments from ransomware. What else are they covered from?
Well, as I said, Michael, it can vary from policy to policy. Some companies have got very different approaches to it, but obviously, other than ransomware, probably your next biggest cost would involve business interruption. How long is your business going to be down? What's the recovery period? How good are your backup and recovery systems that you've got in place? Then on top of that, a lot of industries could face fines if they're subject to regulatory or government or industry legislations. Then you have, of course, it's the amount of time involved in the incident response, in forensic analysis, because one of the important things about if you've been successfully attacked, you need to find out why you've been attacked and how you stop those attacks from reoccurring, especially, as I said, the statistics say if you've been attacked once and you've paid ransomware, you're 80% likely to get attacked again. There's issues around replacement of hardware and software that you can insure for, any legal costs that you may incur because you may face litigation from customers, or in some cases, even partners. If you're part of an electronic supply chain, you may also damage some of your partners' infrastructure. So there's a lot of costs around legal costs, notification and monitoring costs, replacement of equipment and software, and just general expenses involved in getting your business back up and running. If you start rating where all the expenses are, I think you've got, obviously, as you pointed out, you've got the ransomware, then you've got things like the costs revolving around business interruption. Then I'd say you've probably got, potentially legal costs and replacement of infrastructure costs. So they'd be the main things that you're going to be looking to protect against. One of the biggest things out of all of this is that's something that's very hard to insure against is the reputational damage, the damage to your brand name. So if you look at costs in total and the costs that you may be able to recover by a cyber insurance policy versus the impact of a successful cyber attack on your business, then the impact on your brand name, your reputational damage, etc., can by far be the biggest cost that you would incur.
So just like with anything, the prevention is better than the cure at the end of the day. So if you can get in there and prevent this from happening, then you're going to mitigate against downtime, payments out, litigation, and just damage to your brand.
Well, as we always say to people, cybersecurity is you need to be reactive. You can't wait till something happens. You need to be out there. You need to find out, what threats could potentially harm your business, where are your key assets, where are your key assets located, and focus on those things rather than try and rely on a one-size-fits-all strategy when it comes to your cybersecurity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, who needs cybersecurity insurance?
I believe, and I'm a small business owner, so I know the challenges that small business owners face in terms of the cost of running a business. Therefore, I believe that cybersecurity insurance is a business risk. It's similar to any other business risks that we face, whether it's a physical break-in or, hardware failure, software failure, director's indemnity, whatever we insure against. I believe it's the same as any other insurance. So we have to assess what our risk is, whether we're high, low, or medium risk. And there's a number of ways of assessing those factors. And then we have to decide on, what level of insurance makes us feel comfortable in terms of addressing the risks. I guess there's always that level of risk that business managers or business owners feel comfortable that they can accommodate and say, well, I know I've got a risk exposure. I know if the worst thing happens, it's going to cost me X, Y, Z. I'm prepared to live with that because I don't want to pay an exorbitant insurance policy. So I think in answer to your question, Michael, I think everybody should consider cyber insurance.
Yeah, it's a really good point because you do have to work out for your own business what level of risk am I willing to accept. You can get all the insurance in the world, but it then may become too cost prohibitive to buy it all.
Well, it's definitely, as I said, one of the things going back to ransomware just briefly is the amount of payouts and the percentage of the payouts versus the premiums that are paid into an insurance company is going to enforce substantial increases in cybersecurity insurance policies. And I've seen figures as high as 40% year on year, that is. So, 40% is a big whack. But then I look at it from the other side of it, and insurance companies are telling me that they're paying out something like 70% of the premiums that they collect, they are paying out on cybersecurity claims. That doesn't leave them a lot of margins once they start to take out their general business overheads and trying to make a profit out of it. So you can see very clearly why insurance companies out there might be saying, is this a good business to be in? If the answer is yes, they're no different from you or I or any other business. They're going to start to assess the level of risks and whether they're prepared to accept that level of risk. It's another factor that's got to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and absolutely, man. I could see a future where if they want to continue on with supplying, a cyber insurance, you'd have to prove that you have a certain level of security set up on your systems because, if they're paying out 70% of their premiums that are coming into them, and it's going up 40% per year, then suddenly those payments are still getting larger and larger and larger as years go on, or more and more people are being affected, one of the two. So it's either, maybe it's a bit of both, that more and more businesses are getting ransomware and the ransomware gangs are then putting up their fees. And it's scary as well because I guess if you don't have cyber insurance and you do get stung by that, if you don't have the option to get it at all and you get stung by ransomware, then where does that put your business? Where does it put you and your business if you do get it? Yeah, it's a bit of a sobering thought, actually, to think that one wrong click on an email could end your entire business.
That's correct. And and there are numerous cases, both in Australia and around the world, where a successful cyber attack has caused a business to fail. The businesses have just said, one, maybe they can't afford to pay the ransomware. Maybe they choose on moral grounds that, we're not going to reward bad behavior. Or maybe the reputational damage to their brand has been so great that whilst they've been trying to recover or struggling from recover, their customers have said, oh, look, we can't wait. We'll go to your competitors and do business with your competitors. And they never come back. So, the question about should I have cyber insurance, should I not have cyber insurance, again, comes back to individual companies assessing their risk and then assessing their appetite for that risk and coming up with something that may be a reasonable solution for their business. Because cybersecurity, one size doesn't fit all. cyber insurance, one size doesn't fit all businesses. So it's a matter of understanding your risk and assessing what level of risk is acceptable to your business. And we all make those decisions on different aspects of our business. We make it on, say, for professional indemnity, something that a lot of us know about. It's very expensive insurance to have, but can you afford not to have it? And that's the question. You've got to keep coming back. Can I afford not to have cyber security insurance?
When you compare it to the other insurances that you have out there on your business, I guess the only main difference in those are that this is going to be an attack on your business as opposed to someone internally, giving the wrong advice. That potentially could be controllable, I guess, if you did the right training or you had the right oversight. Whereas with hacking attempts or ransomware or just getting your infrastructure penetrated by an attacker involves someone outside the business focusing an attack on you, or even just spreading their phishing emails out to hundreds of different businesses, and just someone within that business having a lapse of concentration one day, clicking on the wrong email, and bang, you're out of business. I guess that's the difference between having the insurances that you would normally get versus cyber insurance. You're insuring against an attacker from the outside the business, where most of the other things that you'll be insuring for is within the business.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think that's one of the things that makes it very different. But you obviously, when you're talking about cyber insurance too, you've got to take into account that 80% of successful breaches are caused by human error. I should point it out before, that is an employee accidentally clicking on the wrong link or providing the wrong information to somebody that's an imposter that has access to your email addresses, your credentials and that, and can use that as a pathway to attack. So, as we say, Michael, and one of the things we point out to our partners and their customers is the starting point when you're considering cyber insurance, or when you're considering, building and putting in place an effective security program, is to find out what vulnerabilities exist in your infrastructure, where your key digital assets reside, identifying those vulnerabilities, finding out which one of those vulnerabilities can be attacked or provide an attack surface for a cyber criminal, bad guy, and then rectifying them. Now, by doing that, you're improving or minimizing your risks of a successful attack, but you're also providing some factual information for an insurance company to base the premium pricing for your insurance company. Because as we said earlier, no two IT infrastructures are the same. They're all unique. And if you can understand what your potential vulnerabilities are, you can address them, you can minimize your risk, and you can also use that information, because it's tested information. It's not filling out a piece of paper. It's actually giving somebody quantifiable proof that what your security status is, and therefore that can impact on your premiums.
It's almost tantamount to those questions that you get. So it's almost, you wouldn't own a property or have a business if you didn't have, building or contents insurance, or, you always take that out, and someone has to physically be there to, break into your building, steal things. Whereas with the cyber insurance, they don't have to be anywhere near you. They could be on the other side of the world and
right.
still steal from your business.
Yeah.
But when you're filling out those forms and doing buildings and content insurance, a lot of the times you'll have, do you have locks on your door? Do you have an alarm? Do you have security bars on your windows? Stuff that you, as you said, you can quantifiably say, yes, I have this. Here's the proof that I do. Whereas with the cyber insurance, not a lot of people have that. A lot of the cyber insurance forms that I've seen have been one page, and it's been, do you have an antivirus tick? Do you have an anti-spam filter or something on it? You tick the box and then say, there you go. There's no other checks on top of that to say, yes, I absolutely can say that we've ticked all the boxes we possibly can to ensure our risk is minimized. It's almost pretty flippant. I don't know how insurance companies could actually go about that without having someone who's done an assessment on the business to say, here's some piece of paper to say, yes, we can absolutely ensure that this has been done.
You make a very, very valid point, Michael, and that's what I say to a lot of people. I like to use the analogy of car insurance when I'm talking about this, because your point that you've made is insurance companies don't have enough information on which to assess your risk. Now, for argument's sake, if I go to insure my car with an insurance company tomorrow, they know what make it is, what model it is. They know how easy it is to repair. They know the cost of the parts. They know a profile of if it's in a car accident, these are the likely amount of damage. They ask you where you garage it, which suburb you live in. So all of those factors help them feed that into their historical databases, all their algorithms and everything else, and they come up with a premium. They don't have that information when it comes to cybersecurity. That's the challenge for them. That's why, ransomware has become such a key in all of this, because they decided to pay out ransomware payments. And the other thing, as you point out, a lot of those insurance companies, although some of them are a little bit more mature now, started off with the questionnaire. And my point with the questionnaire is, with all the best intentions and the best goodwill, I can sit there and 100% answer truthfully all those questions. What I do not know is whether I've already been infected. Because as you and I know, malware, etc., can sit on anybody's IT system for not just days, but months. And in some cases, some of the stories we're hearing around the world, malware sat on specific infrastructures for 10 years before it's been activated. So that's another thing that obviously worries insurance companies. Well, I'm insuring you. I believe everything you've told me, but how do I know you're not already infected? And that's one of the big challenges for them.
It is. And I remember the story of the Sony network being hacked back in 2014. They believed that, they had a lot of data exfiltrated, and believed that, I think that was North Korea. I think they ended up blaming because of that movie, The Interview, I think, that they were about to release. And they were in the network there for months, I believe, before they flicked the switch and said, we've been in your network, too bad, and we've taken all of your data. So yeah, and that's a really good point, because you don't know whether someone's in your network until something happens. So that is a big risk for insurance companies. While we're on that path, so what would a typical cyber insurance policy cover you for?
I think, basically all the things that we've covered so far. Obviously, insurance companies are different between different companies, and they use different terminology, etc. But I think, generally what all cyber insurance policyholders are trying to achieve is they're trying to offset some of the expenses that they may incur arising out of either an unauthorized or authorized access to their physical or electronic data or software within their network or their business. So in general, that's what people want to insure against. Insurance companies will break that down into categories like standard items, key additional benefits, or optional extensions. But again, it comes back and covers all the things we've been talking about: the ransomware, the replacement costs, recovery costs, financial losses. Forensic analysis, I always see as key, as I said before. Again, it comes back to benefits versus cost. What am I really concerned about? And again, I can see a lot of people sitting there saying, I'm concerned about loss of revenue, impact on the business, and geez, I don't want to be hit with an astronomical bill for ransomware. So I think a lot of people are more focused on ransomware recovery costs and trying to minimize the amount of time that they're losing income on. And then again, you start to break down a lot of those costs and say, well, loss of income, does that cover salary costs and that? Because I could have all my employees sitting there twiddling their thumbs because they don't have access to any systems to do their work, etc. So again, cyber insurance, no different from any other insurance. You can have a shopping list of things that you want to insure against. It's whether the cost of having all of those items versus the benefits from having all of those items. And the other thing you've got to look at when you're making those decisions is what restrictions may exist in the policy. I notice insurance companies always like to tell potential policyholders, oh, you should get an insurance broker involved because they're the experts. But my view is that if you're going to get an insurance broker in because he's the expert when it comes to insurance policies and what it can cover and what exclusions to be careful of, or what exclusions to understand, then you should also get yourself a cybersecurity expert to cover off the other side of it in terms of how can I present my risk profile and demonstrate that I've got a low risk profile, therefore I should have a lower premium than, say, somebody who doesn't have the same level of security in place that I do. So that's part of the thing that I think. But again, it's, how much can the business afford? What do you think are going to be the largest impacts on your business if you do have a problem?
So just adding on to that, what are the exclusions that you know of from these policies?
Well, there can be insurance companies, as we all know, are pretty good when it comes to exclusions, but if they could prove that there was any pre-existing security issues that were known before the policy took effect. Some companies now are talking about limiting the payments, and they may say, oh yeah, you're covered for ransomware, but we're only going to cover 50% of the demand, or we'll only pay X amount. So they may not cover the whole lot. In some policies I've seen, there's actually time limits on the recovery period. So they say we'll pay all the costs, but for argument's sake, I'm using this as an example. If it takes you more than 4 months to recover, then we may not continue to cover costs after that period of time. So, they may have exclusions around government or regulatory fines. One of the other things I've seen that people should always be aware of is allocation of payments can be made at the insurer's discretion. And I think that's always a hard one, because you may not be insured for what you think you're insured as, because, the insurers are always looking to how they can mitigate their risks of exposure, and minimize their risks. So another one that I've heard about is a waiting period. So your policy may not take effect on the day you sign it or the day you start paying premiums. There may be a period there. So again, they can assess whether you've got any pre-existing problems.
Kind of reminds me of the insurance company's use of flood damage. I've heard that there's been some, liberal use of that, where, it's not specifically flood, but there's a lot of water, and suddenly, hey, we're not covering you for that because, well, it's classed as a flood. So it almost feels like it's at the insurer's discretion to say, well, we don't think it was that, it's this, so we don't cover it.
Well, that's probably one of the most contentious issues with general insurance of all times about, flood damage, act of God, whether you built your house on a floodplain or not. So I always say insurance is insurance. There's no difference. Insurance companies, which you can understand, are trying to minimize their risks. The problem with cyber insurance specifically is you're dealing with a lot of unknowns, because asking somebody to fill out a piece of paper telling you that what firewall they've got, what level it's at, whether they've got antivirus, web filtering, etc., all of those things don't necessarily reflect your risk profile, or whether you've got a high risk or a low risk. They may also start to look at what industry you're in and other things associated with that. But at the end of the day, until you've done testing and you have a report that says, I have these vulnerabilities are critical severe, and I know how to fix them. I also know that if a cyber criminal or a hacker could gain access to these vulnerabilities, then they could get into my systems, and knowing which systems they can get. And Michael, as you and I know, it's not necessary to insure all your digital assets. There may be digital assets that don't mean much, but there may be the assets that house your proprietary information or your client's personal details, etc. And you may say, we need to isolate those. We need to have cyber insurance covering those. But these other systems, it doesn't matter. I remember when people first started to use bureaus and that. One of the things that companies never, ever let out of being in-house was the server that had the financial records on it. The chief financial officer still had a server under his desk. Everything else could be outsourced, but not the financial information. And I think it's very similar. Where are your critical digital assets? How can you isolate them? And then maybe I just have an insurance policy to cover all of those. Maybe I don't care about if somebody accesses my emails or whatever else. I just want to make sure that they don't have access to my patents or copyrights or anything like that. And we've all heard stories about people that had patents and copyrights on very valuable equipment, and suddenly they find a cheap competitor from the other side of the world using the exactly same specs, which they obviously stole, but nothing can be done about it. So cyber insurance is the same as any other insurance and should be treated the same. And you've got to be careful because there will be exclusions in the policy.
How would you then go about getting cyber insurance? I've seen the one pages that a number of our clients have come to us and said, I don't know what I'm filling out here. Are there any other ways, or how would you typically get cyber insurance?
I think most people go and talk to an insurance broker, but I think the step before that is understanding what your risk profile is. And what we say to customers is, let us do a vulnerability assessment for you. By doing a vulnerability assessment, what you're doing is you're getting a report that says, here are all the vulnerabilities that exist. Most systems have a list of vulnerabilities, and businesses shouldn't be scared about doing vulnerability assessments or vulnerability scans, because it doesn't necessarily result in you having a big bill on all the extra equipment or software that you have to replace or buy. 9 times out of 10, it's just a matter of fixing things that you haven't paid attention to. But what it does, it tells you what the problems are. It gives you a chance. It tells you how to remediate those problems and fix those problems. And then you can retest to make sure that all of those fixes have been implemented correctly. So you as a business owner or a C-level executive can say, well, I understand how secure my business is now. I think that's a good starting point to talk to the insurance companies. And maybe there's a little bit of a step in between there where you say to your insurance company or broker, if I have a vulnerability assessment done by a third-party cybersecurity expert, a CISO, somebody that's qualified and certified as a cybersecurity expert, if I have that independent report and it shows that I'm secure, then what impact will that have on the policy? Will that halve the price of the policy? Will it quarter it? Now, people say to me, but the insurance company's not interested in taking less money from us. What they're interested in is having less of a risk. So if they're taking less money from you, but they have a high percentage chance of not having to pay out on that premium, then they are interested. And I think a good example of that is a number of those larger insurance companies now offer that type of service themselves to their customers or their potential customers.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that you could actually go to the insurance companies and almost negotiate in that way. I mean, is that done usually through a broker, or is that just done directly with the insurance
It's
company?
normally done through a broker, mate. And as I said earlier, insurance companies like you to go and talk to brokers. But I think it's negotiation, and they'll push back, and you'll have the insurance companies that do it themselves and say, yes, Michael, that's acceptable, but you have to use our consultants. You can't use an independent consultant. So there's a little bit of toing and swaying there. I always say to people, well, if you use an independent consultant, the information and the reports belong to you. So you can access them and you can, remediate and fix any problems before you show the final report to the insurance company, because you've fixed everything. Secondly, because the information is yours, you can use it for historical analysis going forward on what progress you're making in keeping your environment secure, because as we know, things change. People add software, they add hardware, they add new applications. Things are forever moving. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that the problems that were there, the vulnerabilities that did exist, have been remediated. If the insurance company does all that for you, then they own the data. The other value of an independent consultant like Loyal IT is that you can then work on developing other aspects of their cybersecurity strategy or program or policy, however you want to word it.
How often would you recommend an assessment be done on the network? Are we talking quarterly, yearly, or in between? Like, what would you be, from your experience in providing businesses with assessments on the risks or vulnerabilities in their network? What is the recommended time frame that we would use to do this?
Quite a few factors that you'd take into consideration in terms of the size of business, the nature of the industry they're in, because as you and I know, some industries are more prone to attack than other industries. It's the type of information that they'd be handling, whether they're part of an electronic supply chain. That means they're a small business, but they're linking to far bigger businesses and they don't want to cause any security issues for those larger companies. As we all know, some of the major breaches around the world that we've all learnt and we hear about and we read about is because one of their suppliers was attacked and they gained access through a small business being connected electronically to the larger business. So there's a number of factors to be taken into consideration. There are some guidelines out there, and the guidelines say that you should do a cybersecurity audit once a year. In our world, what that consists of, it consists of doing a vulnerability assessment. So you identify what the problems are. You then identify which of those problems could be used as an attack surface. So you do a penetration testing, and then you do a remediation exercise based on that. And then you retest to make sure that everything you've done, all the remediation actions that you've taken, implemented successfully. The recommendations, and this is largely where you start looking at the size of the business and the type of information you hold and the industry, etc., depends. But what we say to a lot of businesses, at least 3 or 4 times a year. I'm a small business person, so I know the importance of weighing up costs versus benefits on everything you do. And I think that becomes cost effective for businesses of all sizes. So an annual security assessment followed up by a quarterly vulnerability assessment. And then if you need to take any further action based on the quarterly, or, if you're a larger business, you may choose to run those vulnerability assessments throughout the year on a monthly basis or more regularly. We did an exercise for a company that, Michael, recently. They had a cybersecurity audit done and they had a very good result out of it. But they also opted to come back and said, oh, well, how often do you recommend we have this done? Because of the size of the business, we told them, and they came back and said, you beauty, can we schedule one for December? So it's, there are people out there that are getting the message that's saying, well, this makes sense. They also had a lot of questions that you raised before about, can you have a look at my cyber insurance policy and tell me if it's covering what I need it to cover? And we said to them, go back, tell them what you're doing, show them the reports out of your program and say, well, this is what I paid last year. What am I paying next year? Can you whittle down that 40%? Can you get it to the fact where the insurance company says, well, you're a great risk. We want to have your business. There's no increase for you.
Yeah. And I guess that's important to note as well, that you're doing it quarterly because vulnerabilities are being found every day in all sorts of systems. And, I just got a notification last night that our internal video cameras at our office had a vulnerability in the software product for that. And they said, well, if it's externally facing, you need to turn that off so that you don't get compromised. Luckily, we already have them behind the firewall. But it's things like that where you may not necessarily know these vectors into your business. Like, do you know whether your video cameras are vulnerable? Do you know whether your doorknobs or your electronic? I'm trying to think of other things that might be vulnerable. Your IoT devices around your own home or business are vulnerable to attack, to get people in your door. I mean, I'd hate to have the alarm system be vulnerable and someone be able to turn that off remotely.
Well, it's very interesting you raised the issue about video cameras and that in boardrooms, because we became aware of that a couple of years ago, and we actually sat through a demonstration where somebody actually remotely turned on the microphone to the conference phone on the board table. They were able to, listen in on the board meeting, and more importantly, they turned the camera on so they could read what was on the screen.
Wow.
Of the presentations, right down to being able to read the whiteboard beside the screen where people will say, no, this is the revenue figure we want for this year. So those sorts of things have worried me for a long time, Michael.
And that's really scary. I mean, everything has a camera, everything has a microphone in it. So, have that, you invite that into your business. You have that there to make your life easier, but it can also be exploited. I mean, there's malware out there for phones that will do exactly the same thing. And sometimes you just don't even know that that's on it. So
I made my family so paranoid about webcams, etc., that a couple of years ago that every time I walked past one of their laptops, there was a Band-Aid over the camera.
I've seen a lot of people do that and put the piece of tape across the camera. You sometimes never know. I know there was malware once where you could turn on the camera, but usually you have a little light that will come on to indicate that the camera is recording. There was a piece of malware that would turn the camera on but turn that light off. So you never know. You have to take everything that you possibly can to do to keep yourself secure. And if you're worried about someone spying on you through your webcam, cover it over, unplug it if it's a USB one, until you actually need to use it. So you take some of these precautions into your own hands sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you can't just rely on the technology to do what it says it does and to be secure.
And I think that, that brings to another point of what makes a very good security policy and program is that area of security awareness training. I think that's another important factor that companies should always raise when they're taking out a cyber insurance policy, that they do have active programs in place to make sure that staff keep cybersecurity front of mind in all cases, because you and I know, and we've seen the progression over the years in the quality of those phishing emails. 3 or 4 years ago, you used to look at them and they were full of grammar and spelling mistakes and that. Now you've got to look 3 or 4 times to say, is this really an email from Michael or is it from somebody else?
Absolutely. There could be only subtle changes to it. And we demoed a product that you supplied us recently to be able to test people on their ability to detect if it's a phishing email or a scam email or not. And I really love that product. I think it's great. And it would be really, really good for small businesses to be able to adopt that more, to be able to test their users. And for those users who fail the test, get a little bit of training, get more training so they can identify what's going on, identify these emails, because who knows, it could have been a scammer email that got through your spam filter and your antivirus, and they click on it and suddenly you're done. So having those awareness programs in place is very, very important. It's the best defense against social engineering and phishing is knowledge. Knowing is half the battle is what I try to say.
Well, as we said, human error is 80% responsible for successful hacks. And I guess in amongst that figure of human error, you've got the small percentage of people who have deliberately done something because they want to sabotage the company they work for on the way out the door, or they think it's they want to take some confidential information with them because they're going to work for a competitor or whatever. But that area of making people fully aware, again, is an important component of an overall security policy. And when we talk about doing all of these things help you reduce your cybersecurity premiums, I think the answer is it's not just so much doing a cybersecurity audit or doing a regular scheduled vulnerability assessments. You also need to have those other things in place, like policy maintenance on how you manage your settings, not allowing people to install stuff using vendor default passwords and things like that. So how often do you test your backup and recovery? Is it something you've got written down and it's nice, but nobody ever tests it? Or can you turn around and say, oh, by the way, we test this every month, every quarter, and we know that we can recover everything in 2 or 3 days. All of that will have an impact, but it's not just about reducing the price of your insurance policy. It's obviously making sure you minimize your risks, because the bad guys are lazy, as you and I know, Michael. They go for the soft target. So if it looks too hard for them to crack into or breach what security you have in place, they move down the road. It's the old story, like, I'm not going to break into your house because I know you've got a security alarm. I know you've got deadlocks on all your windows and your doors, but I know the guy down the road, he leaves his back window open. He's got no locks on his window. Is he going to go to your house or is he going to go to the one down the corner? And I think that's the same story when you come to cyber security. How hard is it to get in? Make it hard and they'll go somewhere else.
Exactly. You don't want to be that
for your neighbour, but good for you.
Yeah, exactly right. So as long as you're protected, that's fine. So you just don't want to be that low-hanging fruit where the hackers are going to come after you. In your opinion, are there any common ways you've found to minimize premiums to maximize your coverage?
The answer to that question, Michael, is to have a look at a holistic or a more complete security program. We've talked a lot about cybersecurity audits. We've talked about vulnerability scans. We've talked about backup, recovery, continuity programs, sort of maintenance programs like patch management, regularly ensuring that you change passwords, etc., on firewalls. The other thing that is also important and can again apply to companies regardless of their size is adding real-time monitoring to it. And what that means is that you can arrange for a managed security service provider to monitor your IT infrastructure 24/7. and that monitoring is done by security engineers, security analysts, very well experienced people. And what they can do is track any attempted breaches. They can send you alerts and they can take remedial action before you know anything's happened. So that's another way of adding to it. It's becoming more and more popular. It's also known as security as a service. So I think if you look at all of those things, and again, you put them all together and you decide which is important for you. Again, I forgot to mention security awareness training. That's an important component of all of those things. As an organization or a small business person, I sit there, I look at all of these different factors that make up a good security program. I look at which ones make sense to me and how could that impact on the security of my business, and how does it impact on a cyber insurance policy that covers me for exceptions. Basically, the cyber insurance policy is you're offsetting your costs, you're transferring your risks and your costs to somebody else. And it's how much of that risk or cost you want to transfer and how much you want to use these other things that insurance companies may or may not take into consideration when setting your premium. How does that improve my security posture or profile? As we said previously, you want to make it tough for the bad guys to try and get in, so they'll go elsewhere. I think it comes back to the insurance policy also. Getting the best deal, making sure you're secure, getting the best deal.
Kind of goes back to what we were saying before, is prevention is better than the cure, because even if you are hacked and someone gets into your network and steals your data, they have your data. So if you have personally identifiable information that could be damaging to someone else, like their identity can get stolen, your name is going to be mud every time that they get a phone call from a loan company saying, hey, I've got this loan application across my desk for $5,000. Was that actually you? And you'd have to then turn around and say no. So in the podcast previous to this one that we're putting out now, I interview Anna, who's had her identity stolen, and due to the fact that certain things don't expire, like her driver's license and her Medicare card don't expire for a period of time, checks are not done that deeply to see whether those forms of identification are actually still valid. So she's still getting 5 years down the track. Her license, I believe, expires before the end of the year. So hopefully that will stop things from happening again. But she is still getting phone calls from lending agencies saying, hey, did you just apply for this loan? She's also been getting phone calls from phone companies like Vodafone to say, hey, you owe this bill because, well, you've taken out this contract with us and now you're not paying us. So it's been a constant hell for her. And if you as a business are only thinking about how can I keep doing business and don't worry about my data, it can go out there as long as I'm covered from a cyber insurance point of view, then that's also the wrong point of view to be taking. You really should be saying, what can I do to prevent this happening in the first place? But if somehow something does happen, I need to then be covered for it to be able to keep my business going. First and foremost, you need to be keeping your client's data, your own data, private and secure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Michael. And I said before, to lose personal data, whether it's credit card numbers, tax file numbers, Medicare numbers, is something that everybody's got to be held accountable for to the highest standards, because, once you lose your identity, it's very, very hard to get it back and to, correct the records. And I think, and that's another point about ransomware too, is not only do the cyber criminals steal, encrypt your information and ask you to pay for the de-encryption key. Before they do that now, they steal the information so they can sell it. So there's a double whammy now, which makes cyber security and taking preventative and proactive measures even more and more important, because you as a business may say, oh, geez, that was lucky. I had cyber insurance. They paid the ransomware. I've got all my data back. The de-encryption key worked. Geez, I've dodged a bullet. But you may not have dodged a bullet, because, as you pointed out in the case of the person losing their identity, we all know that on the dark web, you can buy credit card information and you pay for it per transaction, and the price is set whether I have your name, your date of birth, a credit card number, a tax file number, whatever, the price goes up. So that's an important point, that every business has to keep in mind. And I think, that's largely why the federal government introduced the data notification breaches. And it starts with companies that are relatively small with $3 million worth of turnover. And that's when it comes back to business reputation and that, because businesses may say, well, I couldn't help that. But businesses have got to understand, as you pointed out, hey, wait a sec, Michael, you lost my credit card details. And now I'm getting all these demands from different people, or being told I've just signed up a new contract. I've just borrowed $50,000 from a bank, et cetera, whatever it is. You're going to take a very dim view of that business. In actual fact, not only that, if you can prove that business ABC was responsible, then you start litigation. And that's why I said one of the things that people look at insuring against in their cyber insurance is litigation and legal costs. But that's something that forces up your premium. So it's another factor to be taken into consideration, a number of things that can damage your business and force your business to the wall.
Yeah, and damage others. And that's really what we're trying to prevent here as well, is like damaging other businesses and other people who I'm sure, I know Anna mentioned that it went back to the Equifax breach. So there was an Equifax breach in America. Some Australian records were breached as well, and that's where her data was stolen from. And every time she gets these phone calls now, it's just like, damn Equifax. And every time it's on her mind that it's just that company caused me so much pain. And that's what losing your personal identifiable information that you may hold on your servers will do to other people. So it'll be, and it's that sort of reputational damage that you'll incur if this does happen. So,
well, you raise a very important point too, Michael. I think especially true for a lot of small to medium to mid-range businesses. There is a belief out there, I think it's diminishing as time goes by, that, I have all of my IT infrastructure hosted in the cloud. So it's the service provider's problem to provide security. And you wouldn't be surprised, but a number of security audits we do for our customers are just that, because they may have all their data or their infrastructure hosted at an AWS or somebody like that. But that's not true. The cloud is not a panacea to cybersecurity. You're still responsible for that cybersecurity. And if you read the documents, and I've read some of them very carefully, a lot of them clearly, the cloud providers clearly state that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. This is what we're responsible for. This is what you're responsible for. And I think more and more people need to understand that, because the bad guys aren't stupid. And the bad guys worked out a while ago, if I attack a service provider, I can harvest a lot more information than if I'm targeting company ABC down in Sydney or Melbourne. So they will go after the big service providers now. One, because they can find ways in, either via inbuilt malware into components or platforms that they're using, or some other way. And once they're in there, geez, rather than working really hard to hack into 10 companies, I've hacked into 10,000 in one blow. So it's a very, very valid point, and it's something I think more and more people have got to be aware of. I think with things like credit cards and that, there's a high level of awareness around, because you have standards and regulations built around how a company has to electronically manage or store the data with credit cards and that. There's companies out there that may not adhere to those standards, may not be good at enforcing those standards. And then you say, my local GP's got all my Medicare numbers, he's got my health records and everything else. And geez, how secure is that? Not picking on GPs, but it's just an area of concern that you raise.
Absolutely.
The potential to have your identity stolen.
Yeah, and recently with the credit card information as well. I mean, at Loyal IT, we don't hold credit card details on file. That's all handled out in the cloud by accredited credit card companies. But we had one instance where we had an invoice go out to a client, and they just emailed over their credit card details and said, take that. And it's like, don't ever do that. What if your email has been compromised? What if Loyal's email was compromised? What if someone was in the middle and saw that transaction go across, that email go across? they've now got your credit card details. So, and I don't know where the fault lies on that one. Like if Loyal IT, let's say, was compromised and they found that credit card details and that was then sent, that was then used fraudulently online, is it Loyal IT's fault because we didn't delete the email perhaps? Or is it the fault of the person who sent the email in the first place? I don't know what the answer to that question is. Like, it's up to the lawyers to decide that, but I don't want to take that risk.
No, that's right, and I'm sure the lawyers will have a couple of hundred different opinions on who's at fault. But I think again that comes back to, and that's why I like a lot of the security awareness training that's happening. And admittedly, it's targeted for companies, but a good component of it is making people aware about their personal security, and don't give your credit card details willy-nilly. As a family, you know, when my girls were still teenagers and like to buy things online, I used to insist there was only one credit card in the family that's used for that and had a very small limit on it, because I figured, well, I don't know where they're buying their stuff, and if they do get hacked, we've built a fence around the potential loss and things like that. But so that's what I like about a lot of the training programs, because it teaches people not just to safeguard corporate information, but how to safeguard their own personal information. And I think that's a skill set that we all need to have.
Yeah, if you understand it to be able to protect your own personal data, then you will be able to take that into the workplace. I think even vice versa. If you get the training at workplace on securing other people's data, you'll likely then be able to see where your weaknesses are in your data handling security in your personal life as well. What is the viewpoint of insurance companies?
It's very interesting because, as I said earlier, 4 or 5 years ago, talking to insurance companies, they all thought that this was a great growth sector for the insurance industry. Now we find that the payouts are higher than they thought. They're questioning the wisdom now of ransomware payouts, whether they should be continuing ransomware payouts. Because of the poor profitability, a lot of them are now talking about, one, increasing their annual premiums 40% year on year, which is rather a significant slug. But they're also saying, as we talked about quite extensively, all of these problems are being complicated by their inability to forecast risks or assess the risks of individual policyholders, because they don't have that historical information they have when they're, you know, assessing car insurance, household insurance, or whatever it is. So it's very interesting to note that 7 of the major insurance companies around the world formed a company called Cyberattacks, which is basically going to be an organization that's going to collect data on insurance claims and work and do more of the analytical work, provide a database for analyzing what's happening in the world of cyber and cyber attacks, and how they, as insurance companies, could minimize their risks, set more reasonable policies, and obviously improve their profit margins on the cyber insurance market. So they obviously see it as opportunities, but they also are questioning how they've actually set this up, and I guess the wisdom in hindsight of paying ransomware, because that seems to be the killer. And that's probably why companies have already indicated they're not going to cover ransomware. It raises a good question. You pointed out before, Michael, that ransomware is probably a significant component of why somebody would take out cyber insurance in the first place. If it's not there, how much does the coverage of the other costs attract people to pay an extra insurance policy every year? Because we all know about insurance policies and how quickly they come around. So there's a lot of factors there, and you've got to assess, as we've talked about quite a bit during this podcast, the need of assessing your risks and the value of the insurance policy to cover that risk. I think it'll be very interesting to see where cyber insurance goes moving forward. I think obviously it will always be available, but just how it could be restructured in the future could be of interest for all of us.
I guess that depends on how easy it is, or the long-term strategy for stamping out ransomware altogether. Because I guess if we don't have ransomware, there's the big payouts that are going to disappear from the insurance companies having to pay it out. So maybe the premiums will decrease, and it will only be covering losses or other bits and pieces that are not ransomware related, because ransomware has now been successfully extinguished. I don't think that's ever going to happen. It's too much of a cash cow, and it's so easy to get payments now through anonymous payment systems like Monero Coin or Bitcoin. I really don't see it going away anytime soon. So it will be interesting to see whether insurance companies do decide to keep on paying out ransomware payments, or whether they're going to say you're on your own, and then you would then have to work out for yourself, is it now worth me actually buying this premium, because that was the main concern that I had.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember about ransomware is a lot of ransomware is state sponsored. So there are renegade governments out there that see as a way of generating funds, especially some of those rogue governments that are already heavily sanctioned. And I won't say who they are because they're probably listening in. Yeah. But I think, your point about, one, it's such a lucrative criminal activity now. Two, there's state sponsorship involved. All of these things are going to contribute to it. Ransomware being with us for a long, long time. It's how we minimize the impact on business and individuals is going to be the important thing. Very early in the piece, when I started to get into cybersecurity, and I sort of asked questions about why does a lot of this activity, not all the activity, come out of Eastern Europe? And somebody pointed out to me, look, you've got a very well-educated population. You've got people that come out of university that can work for the government for a few bucks a month, or these people have got the same intelligence, skills, and everything else to become a hacker and earn $10,000, $20,000 in a couple of days. And the cost of entry is low because they've got all the equipment that they need, the hardware, the software, and everything else, because they stole somebody's credit card to buy it all. So, it's all of those aspects. And then, of course, you've made things a lot worse, whereas not only do you have state sponsorship now, you have ransomware as a service, whereas people with lower skill sets can go online and I don't know how they do it, but maybe they pay a percentage of what they rake in ransomware or whatever. But when I hear things like ransomware as a service, when I also read articles that tell me that there are, in certain countries, people that regard themselves as investors in that are investing in the dark side, so to speak, and they're providing funds for people to set up cyber criminal activity. So yeah, I think we just got to all work very, very hard on minimizing both our company risks, our corporate risks, and our personal risks in how we manage confidential and sensitive information.
Richard, thank you for your insight into cyber insurance and sharing it with our listeners. Richard has provided me with a fact sheet, which I will make available to download. Check out the description of this podcast for the link. Thank you for your time again today, Richard.
Michael, thank you very much for the opportunity to share our passion for cybersecurity and the importance that cyber insurance plays in companies developing and implementing the best possible security strategies. I really enjoyed our talk. Thank you very much for the opportunity again.
Richard's from Softgen Australia. Thank you again for your time. Check out the Softgen website at sgen.com.au. sgen.com.au. If you're in the market for penetration testing or in-depth security assessments, give Richard a call on 02 9416 0416 or email richardc@sgen.com.au. Coming up next will be the normal monthly episode, which will be about the Essential 8 topic of patch updating and Windows 11. Don't miss it. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcatcher and follow us on social media. Until next time, stay safe online.